March 17, 2024. 2:20 a.m. Brooklyn, New York. Two teenage sisters, Samyia and Samia Spain, walk into a local deli on 4th Avenue and Street Marks Place in Park Slope. It's a familiar store in their neighborhood. Just hours earlier, they had been at a family game night. Neither of them had any idea that within minutes, one would be dead and the other injured. Targeted not by someone they knew, but by a complete stranger. That man was V.O. Kelly, 20 years old, previously unknown to the twins. Inside the deli, he approached them, tried to initiate conversation, made an advance, asked for Instagram handles. Samia declined. The rejection was simple, non-aggressive, and direct, but for Kelly, it was unacceptable. Surveillance footage would later reveal what happened next. He was removed from the deli for harassing the girls. He waited outside, calm, focused, armed with a knife. When the girls exited the store, he attacked. Samia was stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck. She died at the scene. Her twin, Samia, was slashed in the arm but survived. Kelly fled. 5 days later, he turned himself in, and yet the court would hear his legal team argue self-defense. What drives a man to commit murder over rejection from a stranger? Why does rejection trigger rage in certain men? Why are women forced to fear consequences for saying no? This is a case of Samyia Spain, a brutal, random killing in a city deli, caught on camera. But beneath the footage, the 911 calls, and the courtroom drama, lies something deeper. Patterns of violent silence, and the overlooked rage of entitled strangers. What really happened? Who is Samyia Spain? And what does this case say about danger in public spaces? Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now let's begin. Samia Spain was a 19-year-old woman living in Brooklyn, New York. She was one of two fraternal twin sisters. Her twin, Samia Spain, survived the incident that would later claim Samia's life. They resided with their family in a residential area in Brooklyn. The household was close-knit and stable. According to public records and family accounts, there were no prior incidents, arrests, or disciplinary issues involving Samia. She did not have a criminal record, nor was she associated with any ongoing legal disputes. Samia had recently completed high school at the time of her death. She was not enrolled in college, but had set short-term and long-term goals related to fashion and modeling. According to her older sister Danasha Goodson, who later spoke publicly during a fundraising campaign, Samia was actively working on building a personal brand, expanding her online presence, and developing a modeling portfolio. She frequently updated her social media with fashion-focused content and outfit styling. This interest in fashion was reportedly shared with her twin sister, and the two often collaborated on appearance and content planning. Within the family unit, Samia held a central role. She was described as dependable and very close to both her twin and her older siblings. There is no indication from any known sources of behavioral issues, substance use, or problematic peer associations. She had a clean reputation both at school and within her neighborhood. Community members who knew her confirmed she was soft-spoken, private, and rarely seen with large groups or in high-risk environments. She and her sister were frequently seen together at local stores, events, and family outings. The night she died, Samia had been at home with her family. Reports confirmed she had participated in a game night with relatives before deciding to visit the Slope Natural Plus Deli in Park Slope, Brooklyn. It was a routine visit to a local store less than 10 minutes from her residence. She was not under the influence of any substance at the time of her death, as confirmed in the immediate aftermath. The visit was not pre-planned for any unusual purpose, nor was there any indication she or her sister were meeting anyone specific. At the time of the attack, Samia had no previous connection to the individual later identified as her killer, V.O. Kelly. She had never interacted with him before, either in person or online. All evidence confirms that Kelly was a total stranger to both Samia and her twin. In the early hours of March 17th, around 2 a.m., the Spain sisters left their family home to visit the local convenience store, Slope Natural Plus, located in Park Slope, Brooklyn. This deli was a familiar neighborhood establishment, frequented by residents during late hours for food and other essentials. The sisters' purpose for visiting the deli was straightforward and routine. They were not accompanied by anyone else. Their visit was unplanned in terms of duration, but typical for young adults in the neighborhood who might seek a late-night snack or quick purchase. The weather conditions at night were normal for early spring, with no unusual environmental factors reported. The exact time of the incident was approximately 2:20 a.m. According to surveillance footage and police reports, the sisters entered the deli around this time. The deli itself was equipped with interior and exterior security cameras, providing clear video evidence of the events that transpired. These cameras recorded the interior of the store, showing the interaction between the individuals involved, and the exterior footage captured the moments just before and after the attack occurred outside the deli entrance. 20-year-old V.O. Kelly was inside the deli prior to the sisters' arrival. Kelly's presence at the deli was not unusual in terms of time and location. However, his behavior during the encounter would soon escalate the situation to a fatal level. Upon entering, Kelly approached the Spain sisters. Reports from store employees and surveillance footage indicate that Kelly initiated conversation with the twins, making what was described as flirtatious or persistent advances. His approach involved direct requests for personal information, including social media contacts. Specifically, Kelly asked for Samia's Instagram handle and requested her phone number. According to witness accounts and video evidence, Samia declined these requests calmly and without any form of provocation or aggression. She maintained composure and did not engage in any confrontational behavior. The sisters reportedly ignored further comments from Kelly after the initial rejection. There was no escalation of the verbal exchange into physical confrontation while inside the store. The interaction, although unwelcome, remained verbal during this phase. Employees at Slope Natural Plus observed Kelly's behavior and found it to be inappropriate and harassing toward the sisters. After Kelly persisted in his advances despite the clear rejection from Samia, the staff intervened. Store employees requested that Kelly leave the premises due to his harassment of the sisters. Surveillance footage confirms that Kelly was asked multiple times to exit the deli. Kelly complied and left the interior of the store, but did not leave the immediate vicinity. This decision by employees to remove Kelly from the deli was an attempt to defuse the situation and protect the sisters from continued harassment. However, it inadvertently set the stage for the attack that followed. What measures can store employees take to prevent escalation when handling harassment cases like this? How might early intervention inside the deli have changed the outcome? Why do some individuals persist in unwanted advances even after clear rejection? What role do security cameras and witness testimony play in reconstructing events? How should public spaces be managed to ensure safety without infringing on personal freedoms? Security cameras inside and outside the deli captured critical footage of the moments leading up to the attack. According to the video, after being asked to leave the store for harassing behavior, Kelly exited and remained outside. The footage shows him pacing in front of the deli, his movements exhibiting signs of agitation, but with a focused intensity. His behavior indicated he was not merely leaving the premises, but waiting intentionally for the sisters to come out. Multiple eyewitnesses who later spoke to the police described Kelly's demeanor as fixated and determined. There were no indications of any attempts by Kelly to leave the area or de-escalate the situation. Instead, his presence outside was purposeful. Within minutes, Samia and Samia exited the deli. The surveillance footage reveals Kelly approaching the sisters immediately after they stepped outside. Without warning, Kelly lunged towards Samia with a knife in hand. The assault was swift and brutal. Kelly stabbed Samia multiple times, primarily targeting her chest and neck areas. Emergency medical reports later confirmed these wounds as the cause of death. The stabbing in the chest compromised vital organs, including the heart and lungs, while the neck wounds severed major blood vessels. Medical examiners determined these injuries were fatal and occurred within seconds. During the attack, Samyia attempted to intervene to protect her twin sister. Video footage shows her moving toward Kelly, possibly trying to shield or pull Samyia away from him. In response, Kelly slashed Samyia's arm. Although injured, Samyia survived the assault. Her wounds were serious but not life-threatening. The entire attack lasted only a few seconds. Kelly then immediately fled the scene on foot, disappearing into nearby streets. The speed and suddenness of the attack left bystanders stunned. Witnesses to the stabbing quickly reacted. Several passers-by, including deli employees and customers, called 911 as soon as the attack ended. Dispatchers reported multiple emergency calls within moments of the incident. 911 operators directed callers to provide exact location details and descriptions of the attacker. Some witnesses provided initial information about Kelly's appearance and direction of flight. By the time emergency responders arrived, the situation was already critical. Within minutes of receiving the emergency calls, officers from the New York Police Department, NYPD, arrived on the scene. Their first priority was securing the area and providing immediate assistance. Paramedics from the Emergency Medical Services, EMS, also reached the deli shortly afterward. Upon assessment, they determined that Samyia had sustained fatal injuries. She was pronounced dead at the scene by medical personnel. Samyia, although seriously injured, was stabilized and transported to a nearby hospital for emergency care. Medical staff reported that she was in stable condition and expected to survive. Following the attack, NYPD detectives took control of the investigation. The first step was to review all available surveillance footage from inside and outside the deli. The footage clearly showed Kelly's movements before, during, and immediately after the stabbing. Detectives also canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing witnesses and collecting statements. Multiple accounts corroborated the video evidence, identifying Kelly as the assailant. The police quickly identified the suspect as 20-year-old V.O. Kelly. A description was circulated to law enforcement across the city. Within hours, the NYPD issued a public statement detailing the attack and identifying Kelly as a suspect. The statement included descriptions of Kelly and urged anyone with information about his whereabouts to contact authorities immediately. A citywide manhunt commenced. Officers deployed to transit hubs, bus stations, and public areas. Surveillance cameras across Brooklyn and surrounding boroughs were monitored in an effort to track Kelly's movements. This manhunt was a coordinated effort involving multiple precincts, the NYPD's Fugitive Task Force, and emergency dispatch centers. V.O. Kelly was identified as the sole suspect in the stabbing and fatal killing of 19-year-old Samia Spain and the assault on her twin sister, Samyia, in Brooklyn, New York, in March 2024. At the time of the incident, Kelly was 20 years old. Public records available to authorities and media indicated that Kelly had no major prior criminal history or documented involvement in violent offenses before the stabbing. Kelly's background is limited in public detail. Unlike high-profile suspects with lengthy criminal records or public social media histories, Kelly was not well known in his community or beyond. Police investigations showed no known prior connection or relationship between Kelly and the victims, Samyia and Samia Spain. The twin sisters had never met or interacted with Kelly before the night of the stabbing. This established the crime as random, with no apparent motive rooted in personal history or conflict. The identification of Kelly as the perpetrator was expedited through multiple sources. Surveillance footage from inside and outside the deli where the attack occurred played a critical role. Cameras clearly captured Kelly's presence before, during, and after the attack, providing visual evidence linking him directly to the crime scene. Additionally, witness statements from store employees and bystanders corroborated the footage, confirming that Kelly had harassed the sisters inside the deli and followed them outside. At the time of public reporting, Kelly's social media presence and activity were not widely detailed or reported. Investigators either did not find significant posts relevant to the case or chose to withhold such information from the public. No evidence suggested social media interactions between Kelly and the victims or signs of planning or premeditation found online. After the attack on March 17th, Kelly was not immediately apprehended. He fled the scene following the stabbing. The New York Police Department issued a public alert naming Kelly as the suspect and began efforts to locate him. On March 22, 2024, 5 days after the incident, Kelly voluntarily turned himself in to police authorities. His surrender marked the beginning of formal legal proceedings. Upon turning himself in, Kelly was taken into custody without incident. Kelly faced multiple serious charges in relation to the stabbing. Second-degree murder for the fatal stabbing of Samyia Spain, assault for the attack on Samia Spain, who survived her injuries, criminal possession of a weapon related to the use of a knife in the attack. Following his arrest, Kelly was arraigned in Brooklyn criminal court. During the arraignment, he entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The court set conditions for his continued detention pending trial, citing the severity of the charges and the risk factors involved. Kelly's defense strategy centered on the claim of self-defense. His legal team presented arguments asserting that the attack was not an unprovoked assault, but rather a reaction to perceived threat or confrontation by the victims or others present. According to defense counsel, surveillance footage that had been made public and reviewed during pretrial proceedings showed Kelly being confronted by multiple individuals inside and outside the deli. The lawyer argued this confrontation placed Kelly in a defensive position, necessitating a response to protect himself from physical harm. The defense narrative implied that Kelly did not initiate the violence but was instead surrounded or provoked, thereby justifying his use of force with a knife. They sought to portray the stabbing as a tragic outcome of a chaotic situation, rather than a calculated attack motivated by anger or malice. In response, prosecutors strongly contested the self-defense claim. They emphasized evidence indicating Kelly had been asked to leave the deli after harassing the sisters, and then waited outside specifically for the sisters to exit. This detail was critical in their argument that Kelly's actions were premeditated rather than spontaneous. Prosecutors characterized the stabbing as a planned ambush, pointing to Kelly's behavior of lingering outside the store armed with a knife after being expelled from the premises. They argued this contradicted the defense's portrayal of Kelly as a victim of an immediate physical threat. Instead, they framed him as the aggressor who intentionally waited to carry out the violent act. The legal debate focused heavily on interpreting the surveillance footage, witness testimonies, and timing of events. Did Kelly act first by following and attacking the sisters after ejection? Or was Kelly provoked by multiple individuals, necessitating self-defense? Was the presence of the knife a defensive measure or an offensive weapon? These questions formed the core of pretrial discussions. Within days of the stabbing, a vigil was organized outside the Slope Natural Plus Deli, where the attack occurred. Community members gathered in increasing numbers to remember Samia and to show solidarity with her twin sister, Samia, who survived the attack but sustained injuries. The vigil was both a memorial and a public statement. Residents used the event to demand attention to safety issues, particularly regarding violence against women in public spaces. Attendees lit candles, placed flowers, and held signs calling for justice and awareness. This public outcry extended to social media platforms, where the hashtag Justice for Samia trended locally. Social media users shared details of the case, urging authorities to ensure swift prosecution of the accused, V.O. Kelly. Community organizations also circulated information to educate the public about gender-based violence and support resources for victims. In response to the immediate financial strain of funeral arrangements and other related expenses, Samia's older sister, Danasha Goodson, established a GoFundMe campaign. The campaign quickly gained traction, raising over $20,000 within weeks. These funds were directed toward covering the cost of the funeral, burial, and family support during the ongoing legal proceedings. The campaign description explicitly referenced the need to support the surviving twin and the family's fight for justice. The visibility of the fundraiser also helped bring further media attention to the case, amplifying public interest and concern. Donors included community members, local businesses, and strangers from across the country, indicating a widespread recognition of the tragedy and a desire to contribute to the family's needs. Parallel to the vigil at the deli, a growing memorial developed outside the Spain family's residence in Brooklyn. Residents and visitors placed photos of Samia, flowers, balloons, and handwritten notes on the property's front steps and yard. The memorial became a focal point for grieving and remembrance, but also served as a tangible reminder of the human cost of the violence. The family occasionally coordinated with community leaders to organize moments of silence and prayer gatherings at the memorial site. Local news outlets frequently covered these developments, maintaining the public's focus on the ongoing case and the broader issues raised. The attack on Samyia Spain quickly drew attention from public figures and community leaders who used their platforms to condemn the violence. Brooklyn Borough President, city council members, and advocacy groups issued official statements denouncing the stabbing as part of a larger epidemic of gender-based violence. These statements consistently emphasize that no one should fear violence when simply living their daily lives, such as walking to a local store at night. Some leaders call for increased funding for women's safety programs, improved street lighting, and the expansion of neighborhood patrols. Others advocated for policy changes to address harassment and assault in public spaces more effectively. Advocacy groups specializing in domestic violence and public safety also used the incident as a case study to highlight systemic failures. They argued that the killing was not an isolated event but part of a pattern of violence disproportionately affecting women and marginalized communities. Following a period of private mourning and medical treatment, Samia Spain, the surviving twin, made a public statement. In clear, direct language, she called for justice for her sister and condemned the violence that shattered their family. She urged the community and authorities to take the incident seriously, emphasizing the need for preventive measures so others would not suffer similar fates. Samia's statement was widely reported and shared, further humanizing the victims and putting pressure on the criminal justice system to proceed with rigor. She expressed gratitude for the community's support, though refrained from detailed emotional appeals, maintaining a composed tone focused on accountability and reform. The stabbing of Samia Spain did not remain confined to the facts of the case. Instead, it sparked extensive public discourse on issues related to violence against women, public safety, and societal attitudes toward rejection and male entitlement. One of the key themes in the public debate was the risk women face when rejecting unwanted attention or advances from men. Samia's killing underscored a pattern where refusal to engage or reciprocate interest can provoke violent retaliation. Experts in gender violence explain that such incidents reflect broader cultural and psychological issues around male entitlement, the belief that men have the right to women's attention and affection, and that rejection justifies aggression. The Spain case was repeatedly cited as a stark example of this phenomenon, illustrating the lethal consequences of these distorted perceptions. The discussion also extended to legal protections and whether current laws adequately deter such violence or address the warning signs before escalation. Advocates called for stronger laws and community education campaigns that challenge entitlement and promote respectful interactions. The case highlighted ongoing concerns about femicide, the gender-based killing of women, and harassment occurring in public spaces. While femicide is often associated with domestic violence, the Spain stabbing emphasized that public, random attacks are also a critical issue. Statistics shared by advocacy groups showed that many women face harassment, stalking, or violence when simply navigating public areas, especially at night. The incident became a catalyst for renewed calls to address these dangers systematically. Reports analyzed the spatial and temporal factors that increase risk, poor lighting, isolated areas, and lack of visible security, and how these elements contribute to unsafe environments. Urban planners, policymakers, and law enforcement were urged to collaborate on targeted interventions. Public safety concerns focus heavily on the vulnerability of women in late-night settings. The Spain sisters were attacked after midnight, a time when many women report heightened fear of assault. Community members share experiences of adjusting their routines to avoid similar risks, taking different routes, traveling in groups, or avoiding certain areas altogether. The case reinforced that these adaptations are often necessary, but insufficient. Experts recommended increased investment in public transportation safety, expanded community policing, and installation of surveillance cameras in high-risk areas. Some proposed awareness programs aimed at both men and women to foster safer public interactions. Media outlets and social commentators placed the Spain stabbing within a broader context of similar incidents occurring nationwide. These cases, often involving rejection-triggered violence, revealed a troubling trend of male-perpetrated attacks on women strangers. Comparisons were made to other high-profile femicides and assaults in urban centers, identifying common factors such as the role of entitlement, lack of immediate legal consequences for harassment, and societal normalization of aggressive male behavior. These parallels reinforce calls for nationwide reforms and increased public awareness campaigns. Coverage of the case shifted from solely reporting the crime to analyzing underlying societal causes. Commentators and experts discussed how cultural norms, media portrayals of masculinity, and systemic sexism contribute to conditions that allow such violence to occur. Discussions emphasized that the Spain stabbing was not an aberration, but a symptom of entrenched attitudes toward gender and power. The media spotlight on these roots aimed to stimulate more profound societal reflection and policy action. As of the latest reporting, the legal proceedings in the case of V.O. Kelly, the suspect in the stabbing death of Samyia Spain, and the injury of her twin sister Samia, remain unresolved. Kelly has not yet gone to trial, which is currently pending. Court records indicate that no bail has been granted for Kelly since his arrest. This decision was made considering the gravity of the charges: second-degree murder, assault, and criminal possession of a weapon. At this stage, there is no public record of a psychiatric evaluation conducted on Kelly. Such evaluations are often requested or ordered in cases involving violent crimes to assess the mental state of the defendant at the time of the alleged offense and their competency to stand trial. Whether this evaluation will be undertaken or has been conducted privately remains unclear from the available data. Prosecutors involved in the case are reportedly pushing for the maximum penalty allowable under the law. This typically means seeking a conviction that carries a significant prison sentence, potentially up to life imprisonment, given the fatal outcome and circumstances of the crime. The prosecution's case is centered on demonstrating that Kelly's actions were premeditated and unprovoked. This is contrasted with the defense's claim of self-defense, which argues that Kelly was responding to perceived threats by multiple individuals confronting him. However, surveillance footage and witness accounts are used by prosecutors to refute this narrative, emphasizing that Kelly was the aggressor who waited outside to ambush the victims. The legal process remains ongoing, with pretrial motions, evidence review, and potential plea negotiations possibly forthcoming before a trial date is set. The Brooklyn Criminal Court and prosecutors are under public scrutiny due to the high-profile nature of this case and its implications concerning public safety and violence against women. The stabbing of Samia Spain has received substantial media attention from a variety of news outlets spanning local and national platforms. Major sources reporting on the case include The Guardian, provided an international perspective on the stabbing, framing the incident within broader conversations on violence against women in urban settings. CBS News focused on a factual timeline of the event and the subsequent arrest and charges against Kelly, providing detailed coverage of the court proceedings. New York Post emphasized the violent nature of the attack and highlighted public safety concerns in Brooklyn neighborhoods. People magazine offered human interest coverage, highlighting the background of victims and the family's response to the tragedy. Brooklyn Paper covered the community reaction, including vigils, memorials, and fundraising efforts for the Spain family. Across these outlets, the case has been framed primarily as a senseless act of gender-based violence. The narrative centers on the dangers women face when rejecting unwanted advances, especially in late-night or vulnerable situations. Public commentary and editorial pieces frequently discuss the entitlement and rage that fuel such attacks. Public opinion, as reflected in social media, community meetings, and news comment sections, largely supports the Spain family. There is a clear demand for justice and systemic change to prevent similar future occurrences. The media coverage also calls attention to the need for improved public safety measures and awareness regarding violence against women. At the time of this report, the case of Samia Spain remains unresolved, with the trial pending and no final verdict issued. The family of Samia continues to demand full accountability for the actions of V.O. Kelly. They emphasize the importance of justice not only for Samia, but to send a message that such acts of violence will not be tolerated or ignored. Samia is remembered as a vibrant young woman with a promising future, whose life was cut short in a brutal attack. The twin sister, Samia, who survived the assault, has become a symbol of resilience and a voice calling for change. The incident highlights ongoing patterns of female victimization in public spaces, especially when women assert personal boundaries, such as rejecting advances. The case underscores the persistent risks women face in everyday environments and the need for systemic interventions. Why do some men respond to rejection with violence? What psychological, social, or cultural factors contribute to violent reactions when advances are refused? Are there patterns that can be identified and addressed through education and intervention? Should self-defense be a valid legal strategy when the attacker was the one waiting outside for his victim? How should the law treat situations where the accused claims self-defense, but evidence indicates premeditation or ambush? What standards should courts use to differentiate between legitimate self-defense and aggressive behavior? Are late-night public spaces truly safe for women in large cities like New York? What existing safety measures are in place, and where do they fall short? How do urban design, policing, and community programs influence safety perceptions and realities? Should more surveillance and public intervention measures be implemented in neighborhoods? Would increased surveillance cameras, better lighting, or more active patrols deter such crimes? How can communities balance safety with privacy and civil liberties? How can schools and families better educate young people, especially men, about rejection, entitlement, and boundaries? What role does education play in reducing gender-based violence? Are current programs adequate, or is there a need for more comprehensive, earlier intervention on topics of consent and respect? If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware. A woman walks out of a courthouse, finalizes her divorce, and feels like she's finally free. She's taken all the right steps. Filed for protective order, warned the authorities, documented everything. But what happens next isn't freedom. It's execution. On the afternoon of April 25th, 2024, 44-year-old Krystal Evans sat in her parked vehicle outside the Spalding County Courthouse in Griffin, Georgia. Moments earlier, she had been inside the courthouse, concluding a legal battle that had consumed her life for over a year. But just as she was preparing to leave, a black car pulled up beside hers. Inside was Tom Mallory, her ex-husband. He exited his vehicle, pulled out a firearm, and shot Krystal multiple times through the window. It was broad daylight. People were watching. There were sheriff's deputies nearby. It didn't matter. Krystal had warned friends, family, and the public. She had posted online that she feared for her life. She had even described her ex-husband's threats, direct, dangerous, and repeated. And just days before the shooting, she secured a permanent protective order against him. So how did a woman who did everything the system asked still end up dead? This is not just a story about one woman's murder. It's about a justice system that couldn't stop it, a man living a double life, a protective order that failed, and a courthouse that turned into a crime scene. Who was Krystal Evans? What secrets did she expose? What did the law know and when? And could her death have been prevented?
There are calls for justice after a woman was shot and killed outside the Spalding County Courthouse. Krystal Evans and her ex-husband, Tom Mallory, were at the courthouse Friday afternoon. They were there for a hearing when Mallory allegedly shot Evans a number of times, killing her. Investigators say he ran from police and eventually shot himself, but he survived.
Stay with us as we unravel the shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. If you enjoy real crime stories that uncover the truth, don't forget to subscribe. Your support helps us share real cases, spread awareness, and give a voice to those who can't speak for themselves. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. These are real people, real events, real consequences. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Marjorie Krystal Evans, also known by her married name Krystal Mallory, was a 44-year-old woman residing in Griffin, Georgia. At the time of her death, she worked professionally in real estate and was described by those who knew her as someone who maintained a strong work ethic. She had several children and spent most of her adult life married to one man, Tom Mallory. Krystal and Tom were married for 27 years. During that time, she played the role of wife, mother, and career woman. From the outside, the marriage appeared stable. There were no major public incidents early on. To neighbors, acquaintances, and professional colleagues, the couple seemed typical, long-standing partners raising a family and building a life together. Krystal was active in her community. She maintained a presence on social media and documented aspects of her life publicly. In the months leading up to her death, those posts took on a different tone. She began writing about personal safety concerns. She warned followers that she was in danger. Specifically, she said if anything happened to her, her ex-husband would be the one responsible. These posts included allegations that Tom Mallory was living a double life. Krystal did not disclose all the specifics in the posts, but implied that there were hidden relationships, secret financial activities, or undisclosed threats that she had uncovered. She posted screenshots of alleged messages and alluded to being followed, intimidated, and threatened. Krystal also used her platform to draw attention to what she described as a lack of adequate protection from law enforcement. According to her posts, she had made reports, sought help, and was not taken seriously. The posts revealed growing concern that the system would not intervene until it was too late. Krystal met Tom Mallory in early adulthood. The exact date of their initial meeting is unclear, but records indicate that the two were together for approximately 27 years. Their relationship began when both were young and continued into middle age. During this period, they married, raised children, and presented themselves as a long-standing family unit. According to available background, the couple shared multiple children who were raised together in their Georgia home. Their relationship remained publicly intact for decades, with no visible legal or police interventions until much later. This stability, however, began to unravel in the last few years of their marriage. Multiple reports indicate that the breakdown of the marriage involved accusations of infidelity and deception. Krystal began to suspect Tom of engaging in affairs. She posted cryptic but direct messages about his behavior, referring to betrayals and dishonesty. She described moments where she realized that her husband was not the person she believed him to be. Some posts suggest she discovered another woman or learned of undisclosed financial activities involving their assets. The phrase double life became a recurring term in her posts. This may have referred to Tom maintaining relationships with other women, hiding money, or conducting illegal or unethical activities without her knowledge. Whatever the specifics, Krystal believed she had uncovered something significant and dangerous. Alongside these suspicions came escalating emotional tension. Krystal began describing the environment in her household as threatening. In text messages and social media captions, she stated that her husband was making verbal threats. She referenced situations in which she felt watched, cornered, or intimidated. There is no indication that Krystal filed criminal charges early in the process. Instead, she attempted to manage the situation by documenting it online, alerting friends and family, and seeking legal protection in court. This ultimately led her to file for separation and begin the divorce process. The emotional and psychological pressure intensified as the legal battle unfolded. Krystal pursued a protective order, citing repeated threats and fear for her safety. In these filings, she referenced verbal altercations, an episode that made her feel unsafe. The court granted her a temporary protective order while evaluating the case. As the divorce proceedings progressed, Krystal made additional posts, stating that she believed she was being followed. She claimed her ex-husband continued to make threats even with the legal order in place. The divorce was contentious and marked by increasing hostility, particularly from Tom Mallory's side. According to her account, 2 days before she was murdered, Krystal was granted a permanent protective order by the court. This legal document was designed to prevent Tom from contacting, approaching, or threatening her in any form. However, there was no formal police protection assigned to her. There were no surveillance measures, no enforced buffer zones, and no required police escort during her scheduled court appearances. Krystal's last few posts suggested that she knew time was running out. She expressed doubt that the legal system would act fast enough. She repeated the warning. If something happened to her, everyone would know who was behind it. These statements were not vague. They were time-stamped, published on public platforms, and visible to friends, relatives, and strangers alike. Screenshots circulated widely after her death, reinforcing the idea that she had predicted what was coming. Krystal's warnings did not result in any preemptive action. Despite the threats she described, the court process continued as normal. The protective order remained on file, but enforcement relied on Tom Mallory voluntarily complying. There were no active police measures surrounding her movements, even on the day of the final court hearing. This history of long-term emotional control, suspected infidelity, financial secrecy, and verbal intimidation set the stage for what would later become a fatal encounter. It revealed a high-conflict separation, in which one party was vocal about feeling unsafe and the other party was subject to legal restrictions, but not actively monitored. The breakdown of the marriage between Marjorie Krystal Evans and Tom Mallory transitioned from personal conflict into a legal battle during the months leading up to her death. After 27 years of marriage, Krystal began the process of separation by filing for divorce. The initial divorce petition was submitted in the early part of 2024. At the time, Krystal had already expressed concerns about her husband's behavior, which she described as manipulative, threatening, and controlling. Following the divorce filing, Krystal and Tom were scheduled for multiple court appearances. These hearings were part of the formal process of dissolving the marriage, addressing property division, custody arrangements, if applicable, and personal protection concerns. During these proceedings, Krystal repeatedly raised alarms about her safety. She alleged that Tom had been stalking her, sending threatening messages, and showing up uninvited at locations where she was present. Due to these concerns, Krystal applied for a temporary protective order shortly after initiating the divorce. This temporary order was intended to establish legal boundaries, restricting Tom Mallory from making contact or approaching her. The court granted the temporary order, but enforcement of such orders often depends on the actions of the individual named in the document. There were no reports of consistent monitoring or law enforcement protection assigned to Krystal during this time. Throughout the separation, Krystal continued to document patterns of intimidation. She told the court that Tom was following her, calling her phone excessively, and appearing at her residence or workplace without warning. These behaviors, as described in court filings and personal communications, matched the legal criteria for stalking and harassment. In the months leading up to the final protective order, Krystal continued to attend scheduled court appearances. She maintained a record of each incident she claimed involved threats or intimidation. Reports indicate that she attempted to strengthen her legal protection by requesting a permanent protective order, citing escalating behavior and her belief that her life was in danger. On April 23, 2024, just 2 days before her death, the court officially granted a permanent protective order. This order legally prohibited Tom Mallory from contacting, approaching, or threatening Krystal in any form. It was meant to provide longer-term legal protection, especially in light of the claims Krystal had made during the previous hearings. However, despite the legal document being finalized, no immediate physical protection was offered. Krystal was not assigned law enforcement detail, and no security measures were implemented at the courthouse for her next scheduled appearance. Her claims were documented in court, but there was no indication that authorities treated her case as a high-level threat requiring emergency intervention. During the months of legal conflict, Krystal turned to social media to share her experiences. Her posts served as a form of public documentation. She described her ex-husband as dangerous, manipulative, and abusive. These posts were not vague or speculative. She explicitly named Tom Mallory and warned that if anything happened to her, he would be responsible. Krystal posted multiple screenshots of text conversations, social media messages, and interactions that she claimed showed Tom's threatening behavior. These posts included descriptions of stalking incidents, unwanted visits to her property, and alleged surveillance efforts. According to Krystal, Tom was monitoring her movements, following her car, and using mutual acquaintances to track her activities. Her posts also criticized the legal and law enforcement response to her situation. She stated that despite reporting the threats and filing for protection, she felt law enforcement was not taking her seriously. She made several references to being dismissed, ignored, or told that there was little officers could do without physical evidence of an immediate threat. In one particular post, Krystal wrote that she feared going to court alone and believed Tom would do something during one of the hearings. She requested additional security but was not granted a police escort or courthouse protection. She expressed frustration that, even after filing multiple reports and receiving a protective order, she was still vulnerable. Outside of social media, Krystal communicated directly with friends and family, voicing fears about her safety. Text messages and private conversations revealed that she believed she was being watched. In one message, she stated that Tom had parked outside her home for hours without speaking, simply sitting in his car. In another, she wrote that he had followed her from work to a gas station and then circled the block multiple times. Krystal also sent voice notes to friends in which she described feeling constantly on edge. She said she avoided routine patterns, changed her daily schedule, and avoided places she used to visit regularly. She believed Tom was using mutual connections to gather information about her movements. In one series of messages, Krystal described her attempt to speak with courthouse personnel about security arrangements. She asked whether someone could walk her to her car after court hearings. She also asked whether Tom could be required to arrive separately and at a different time. Her requests were reportedly met with procedural explanations, but no additional security was provided. By the time the permanent protective order was granted, Krystal had left behind a digital trail of warnings, messages, and social media posts that laid out her fear in detail. She had told her audience, her legal representatives, and law enforcement that she believed she was at risk. She had made it clear that she felt unprotected and that legal documents alone were not going to stop her ex-husband. 2 days after receiving the permanent protective order, Krystal was scheduled for another court appearance. She documented her arrival at the courthouse on social media. It would be her final post. What followed was a fatal encounter that confirmed the exact danger she'd been warning about for months. April 25, 2024, began as a scheduled legal proceeding in Spalding County, Georgia. After months of contentious legal filings, emotional social media posts, and escalating allegations, the divorce between Marjorie Krystal Evans and Tom Mallory was officially finalized in court on that date. Court records confirmed that both Krystal and Tom were present in the courthouse that morning. The final hearing addressed unresolved matters related to custody, property division, and enforcement of the permanent protective order that had been issued just 2 days earlier. The legal separation was concluded, and Krystal legally regained full autonomy from Tom Mallory after nearly 3 decades of marriage. After the hearing, surveillance cameras outside the Spalding County Courthouse captured Krystal walking out of the building. She exited alone and showed no visible signs of distress or urgency. Footage confirmed she was dressed in neutral clothing and carrying personal belongings in her hands. She walked directly to her parked vehicle, located in the adjacent lot just a few yards from the courthouse entrance. Notably, Krystal had no police escort, despite having expressed fear for her life in the days leading up to this event. And despite the existence of protective order, there were no officers specifically assigned to accompany her to or from the courtroom. Surveillance footage shows multiple deputies stationed outside the courthouse, performing general duties. However, none interacted directly with Krystal or escorted her to her vehicle. At approximately 12:11 p.m., another vehicle entered the lot. The vehicle was a dark-colored sedan, later identified as belonging to Tom Mallory. According to the footage and eyewitness accounts, the vehicle pulled into the lot and parked just a short distance from where Krystal's vehicle was located. Tom exited the car holding a firearm. The following sequence occurred in less than 30 seconds. As Krystal was seated inside her car, preparing to drive away, Tom approached from the driver's side. Without any verbal interaction recorded on video, he raised the weapon and fired directly into the window. Multiple rounds were discharged into the front seat compartment. Krystal Evans was struck multiple times. Emergency responders were called by witnesses who heard gunshots. However, by the time first responders arrived, Krystal was unresponsive. Paramedics confirmed that she was deceased at the scene. The final shots were fired at close range and were immediately fatal. Following the shooting, Tom Mallory fled the scene. His vehicle was recorded leaving the courthouse lot at a high speed. Deputies responded within minutes to secure the area and begin the initial investigation. An alert was immediately issued for Tom Mallory's vehicle. Police began coordinating with surrounding jurisdictions to locate the suspect. Given the public nature of the crime, occurring in a government parking lot in broad daylight with visible surveillance, the urgency was high. Officers from the Griffin Police Department, Spalding County Sheriff's Office, and Georgia State Patrol were activated. Several hours later, officers located Tom Mallory approximately 20 miles away in a rural area outside Griffin. He had attempted to take his own life by gunshot. When officers arrived, they found him in his car, suffering from a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. Despite the severity of the wound, Tom Mallory was still alive. Emergency responders transported him to a nearby hospital under heavy law enforcement supervision. He was placed under medical care in critical condition, and law enforcement immediately placed him in custody as a suspect in the homicide of Krystal Evans. While Mallory remained hospitalized, the legal system moved forward. The Griffin Judicial Circuit District Attorney's Office filed formal charges against him. The charges included felony murder for the intentional killing of Krystal Evans with malice aforethought, aggravated assault for discharging a firearm at close range with the intent to kill or cause severe bodily harm, possession of a firearm during the commission of felony for using a handgun while actively committing a violent criminal act. These charges were supported by multiple pieces of evidence, including surveillance footage from the courthouse exterior cameras, eyewitness testimony from individuals in the parking lot at the time of the shooting, ballistic evidence matching the firearm used to the shell casings recovered at the scene, digital and forensic data linking Tom Mallory to the crime, including prior threats posted or sent to the victim and protective order that was in place. Law enforcement secured both the crime scene and the hospital where Mallory was being treated. He remained in custody during his hospital stay, with officers stationed outside his room around the clock. Legal documents were processed to ensure that, if he survived his injuries, he would be transferred directly to a detention center without bail. Local officials, including representatives from the sheriff's office and the district attorney, confirmed that the case was being handled as a domestic homicide. There were no other suspects or persons of interest. Law enforcement confirmed that Krystal Evans had taken multiple steps to seek protection prior to the incident, including obtaining the protective order and making public statements that she feared for her life. The death of Krystal Evans prompted renewed discussion in the local media and among community members about the effectiveness of protective orders in domestic violence cases. Her posts, in which she warned that her husband might try to kill her, circulated widely in the aftermath of her murder. These public warnings, combined with the timeline of events and the lack of active police intervention, despite documented concerns, generated significant public scrutiny. However, from a procedural standpoint, law enforcement and court officials followed standard legal protocols. The protective order had been issued. The divorce proceedings were conducted in court. There were deputies on site at the courthouse. Krystal was not physically assaulted or threatened inside the courtroom or the building. The attack occurred immediately after the court process concluded, outside in a public parking lot. The criminal case against Tom Mallory remains active pending final legal resolutions. The district attorney has indicated that if Mallory survives the self-inflicted injuries, he will face prosecution under the full extent of Georgia criminal law. If he does not survive, the case will be closed as a murder-suicide with formal documentation and forensic evidence retained for public record. Following the fatal shooting of Marjorie Krystal Evans outside the Spalding County Courthouse, her family released public statements expressing both grief and outrage. Most notably, her adult daughter stepped forward to issue a detailed and strongly worded condemnation of the local sheriff's office. Her statements were broadcast across social media and quickly gained attention from local media outlets and advocacy groups. According to Krystal's daughter, the Spalding County Sheriff's Office failed to protect her mother in spite of multiple documented warnings and repeated requests for assistance. She claimed that Krystal had asked for a police escort during her scheduled court appearance, a request that was allegedly denied. The daughter insisted that Krystal had communicated to the authorities that she feared for her life and that her ex-husband posed a credible threat. She accused deputies of refusing to take these fears seriously and alleged that her mother was told no personnel were available for an escort on the day of the hearing. She also pointed to previous incidents where Krystal had allegedly contacted the sheriff's office regarding threats from her ex-husband, Tom Mallory. According to the daughter, those reports were either downplayed or outright ignored. She claimed her mother had been treated as if she were overreacting or exaggerating the situation. She accused the sheriff's office of negligence and stated that the entire situation could have been avoided if the department had acted on any of the warnings Krystal had given in the weeks leading up to the shooting. The family asserted that Krystal had specifically requested police protection for her court appearance. They claimed this request was made both verbally and in writing, and had been submitted as part of her legal filings surrounding the permanent protective order. They stated that Krystal had told multiple people, including court officials and law enforcement, that she was afraid her ex-husband might attempt something violent at the courthouse. These statements were allegedly dismissed or not followed up with any formal security measures. In addition to issuing public statements, the family began demanding a full investigation into law enforcement response. They questioned why a woman with a recently granted permanent protective order was not given at least minimal security. They also asked why Tom Mallory was allowed to approach the courthouse at the same time and whether any effort had been made to prevent the two from encountering each other. The daughter's public comments began to circulate widely online and drew sympathy and anger from the local community. Although the family acknowledged their grief, their public tone was focused more on accountability than emotion. They said Krystal had done everything the legal system told her to do, including filing for divorce, obtaining a protective order, and informing police of threats. Yet she was still unprotected when it mattered most. The family began calling for state-level reforms in how protective orders and court safety protocols are handled in Georgia. In response to mounting public criticism, Spalding County Sheriff Daryl Dix held a press conference to address the accusations. The event was covered by local media and broadcast live on several digital platforms. Sheriff Dix began by expressing condolences to the family, but quickly transitioned to defending the actions of his department. Sheriff Dix stated that, according to official records and internal review, Krystal Evans never submitted a formal request for an escort on the day of the court hearing. He said no official request was documented in writing or logged in their communication systems. He emphasized that while his office was aware of the protective order, they had no reason to believe there was a specific threat plan for that day. To reinforce his point, Sheriff Dix presented surveillance footage from courthouse security cameras. The footage showed Krystal walking unaccompanied and appearing calm as she approached the courthouse entrance. Sheriff Dix stated that she did not look distressed or indicate to any court officer that she needed assistance. He used the footage to challenge the family's claim that she had begged for protection at the courthouse. The sheriff also addressed the history of domestic violence claims between Krystal and her ex-husband. He confirmed that multiple incidents had been reported, but said that both parties had filed complaints against each other at different times. Sheriff Dix argued that the situation was legally complex and did not involve a clear, one-sided pattern of abuse, at least based on the initial reports filed with his department. However, he acknowledged that Krystal had been granted a permanent protective order just days before the shooting. While denying negligence, Sheriff Dix did admit that the legal system has limitations when it comes to enforcing protective orders. He stated that unless an order specifically mandates police presence or is tied to a criminal case, enforcement typically relies on voluntary compliance. He added that resources are limited and escorts are not automatically provided to every person with protective order unless there is a confirmed, immediate threat. Sheriff Dix concluded the press conference by saying his department would cooperate with any state-level review of the case, but he rejected the notion that deputies had ignored direct pleas for help. The aftermath of Krystal Evans' murder sparked a wave of community outrage and debate across Georgia. Within days of the shooting, local residents began organizing protests outside the Spalding County Courthouse. Demonstrators held signs calling for justice for Krystal and demanding accountability from law enforcement. Several groups organized candlelight vigils, pressuring officials to re-examine security protocols and victim protections. The online response was also swift and intense. Hashtags such as hashtag Justice for Krystal and hashtag Protect Victims began trending locally on platforms like Twitter and Facebook. Many social media users reposted Krystal's final messages, including her warnings about her ex-husband and screenshots of protective order. Public sentiment overwhelmingly blamed the system for failing to act despite repeated red flags. Domestic violence prevention advocates used the case to highlight what they described as systemic gaps in court security and protective order enforcement. Representatives from local shelters and advocacy groups argued that protective orders were often treated as symbolic rather than actionable. They called for major reforms, including mandatory law enforcement escorts for individuals appearing in court against people named in active protective orders, improved coordination between court officers and police departments to track high-risk domestic violence cases, automatic security flags for victims scheduled to attend hearings involving former abusers, real-time enforcement tools for protective orders, including digital alerts and GPS monitoring for known offenders. State legislators were also pulled into the conversation. Several Georgia representatives began drafting proposals to revise the enforcement of protective orders and expand courthouse safety measures. Lawmakers called for hearings to examine how the state could prevent similar cases in the future. In Griffin and surrounding communities, the conversation shifted from a singular incident to a broader critique of the legal system's treatment of domestic violence survivors. While emotions ran high among supporters and advocates, many commentators kept their focus on legal gaps, enforcement failures, and the need for structural change. Krystal Evans followed the legal process. She filed for divorce, reported threats, and successfully obtained protective order against her ex-husband, Tom Mallory. On paper, the system had been used exactly as intended, but despite her efforts, the outcome was fatal. Krystal's death highlights multiple failure points in the legal process, particularly when it comes to enforcement, communication, and real-time protection for high-risk individuals. One of the most critical gaps was the enforcement of protective orders. Krystal had a temporary protective order issued earlier in the separation process. She later received a permanent protective order just 2 days before her murder. However, protective orders are only as effective as the enforcement mechanisms behind them. No law enforcement personnel were stationed with her. There were no patrols around her home. No officer was present to ensure her safety at the courthouse, even on the days she was scheduled to appear for a legal proceeding. Tom Mallory was under legal instruction not to contact or threaten her, yet there were no electronic monitoring devices placed on him. He was not under house arrest, GPS tracking, or active supervision. He was free to move without any barrier beyond a written legal directive. Another failure point was communication between courts and deputies. While the protective order was legally valid, it's unclear how quickly the details of that order were communicated to all relevant law enforcement officers in Griffin, Georgia. There was no coordinated response. The courthouse, the deputies present, and the law enforcement leadership in the area had no preventive strategy in place for her specific situation, despite multiple social media warnings and previous reports from Krystal herself. Krystal had made her fears public. She explicitly stated she believed she was being watched, threatened, and followed. In one of her final posts, she told her followers that if she was murdered, everyone would know who did it. Those posts received public attention, yet there was no official intervention to assess her threat level beyond the civil court proceedings. A third and more systemic issue is the lack of surveillance or immediate protection for high-risk individuals in domestic violence cases. There are no laws requiring physical police presence for people who have active protective orders, even when there is a documented pattern of threats or public safety concerns. Individuals in Krystal's position are often left alone to manage their own safety until a crime occurs. This model relies on reactive law enforcement rather than proactive intervention. In Krystal's case, that meant no escort to court, no officer stationed near her home, and no alarm system connected to emergency services. The only protections in place were legal documents, restraining orders, and court filings, which did nothing to physically prevent her killer from approaching her. The broader implications of Krystal's death extend beyond her case. It exposes systemic failure in how domestic violence threats are handled, especially in situations where the danger is well documented. Her death has become a reference point in Georgia for the risks victims face when a legal system moves too slowly or without coordination. In response, state lawmakers in Georgia have begun early-stage discussions about potential reforms, tentatively referred to as Krystal's Law. While no legislation has passed yet, there is growing pressure to increase protection for survivors. Proposed changes may include mandatory law enforcement escorts for victims attending court hearings, increased penalties for violating protective orders, and the use of electronic monitoring for high-risk individuals under restraining orders. After the fatal shooting of Krystal Evans at the Spalding County Courthouse, Tom Mallory was taken into custody by responding officers. He did not flee the scene. Instead, he was immediately placed under arrest and later hospitalized for a brief period due to self-inflicted injuries that occurred during or after the shooting. Initial reports confirmed that he had been in a distressed state, but was deemed stable enough for legal processing. Following his release from medical observation, Tom Mallory was transferred to the Spalding County Jail, where he was placed under suicide watch. His mental and psychological competency to stand trial is currently under review. Legal experts expect that the competency evaluation will determine whether criminal proceedings can move forward in the coming months. Pending the results of that evaluation, formal criminal charges have been filed, including first-degree murder, aggravated assault, criminal use of firearm, and violation of protective order. Each of these carries serious sentencing implications, including the possibility of life in prison without parole. The autopsy report for Krystal Evans has been completed. It confirmed that the cause of death was multiple gunshot wounds. The case file includes video surveillance footage from the courthouse, eyewitness testimony from bystanders, and social media documentation posted by Krystal in the weeks leading up to her murder. These materials are expected to play a key role in the upcoming criminal trial. In addition to the criminal case, civil litigation may follow. Krystal's family is currently exploring the possibility of filing a wrongful death lawsuit. Potential defendants could include Tom Mallory himself, but also government entities or law enforcement agencies accused of negligence. These lawsuits would focus on whether sufficient steps were taken to protect Krystal once her fears were documented. Meanwhile, advocacy groups have begun campaigning for the passage of a new state law named in her honor, Krystal's Law. The law would seek to fill the gaps that her case revealed, including immediate protection for domestic violence victims, better communication between courts and law enforcement, and faster enforcement of court orders. Public attention to the case remains active, especially on social media. Posts tagged with hashtag Justice for Krystal and hashtag Krystal's Law have circulated widely. Community events and public memorials have taken place, with supporters demanding accountability and legislative change. News coverage has kept the case in the spotlight, ensuring that future hearings and legal decisions will be heavily scrutinized. The outcome of the competency evaluation is expected to be announced within the next few weeks. If Tom Mallory is declared competent, a grand jury will move the case into the trial phase. If he is declared incompetent, he may be transferred to a psychiatric facility until deemed stable enough to participate in his defense. Until then, the case remains active but unresolved. The legal system will continue its process, but Krystal Evans' murder remains a prominent example of how civil protections can fail when enforcement and communication break down. How should the legal system improve protection for domestic violence survivors with active court cases? Should police escorts, GPS tracking, or home surveillance be standard for high-risk cases? Do you think Krystal's public social media posts helped or endangered her more? Should victims share public warnings, or does it increase the risk? Should courthouses have mandatory police escorts for anyone with protective order? Would that have made a difference in Krystal's case? Who should be held accountable when protective order fails? The system or the individual? Is the fault with the abuser alone, or does institutional negligence play a role? What does this case reveal about hidden abuse in long-term relationships? How can society better identify and intervene in relationships that appear stable on the surface? If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.